U.S. lawmakers came together and rallied against President Obama's veto of a bill that would allow the families of 9/11 victims to sue the Saudi government. This is the first successful congressional override of a presidential veto in the entire 8 years President Obama has held office. The legislation comes after the 28 declassified pages from the 9/11 Commission report revealed that 15 of the 19 hijackers on 9/11 were Saudi nationals. The country's government has strongly denied any long-standing suspicions that it backed the hijackers, but just days after the veto override, Saudi Arabia's foreign minister is urging Congress to correct the legislation or face serious unintended consequences. Those are his words. Sounds like a threat to me. So is there buyer's remorse, though, due to the possible impact of the legislation on the pseudo-friendship between Saudi Arabia and the United States? Take a look.
This vote, are there any senators in the chamber wishing to vote or to change their vote? If not, on this vote, the yeas are 97, the nays are 1. 2/3 of the senators voting, a quorum being present, having voted in the affirmative, the bill on reconsideration is passed, the objections of the President of the United States to the contrary notwithstanding.
Joining me now is former United States diplomat Jim Jatras. Jim, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Liz. Glad to be here.
It's always great to see you, sir. All right, let me just jump right into this. Buyer's remorse. Is Congress having buyer's remorse over their first presidential veto override here?
No. I'll tell you, Liz, I've worked in this town for 3.5 decades. I worked at the U.S. Senate for 17.5 years. I can't remember anything this sleazy. And frankly, we should have been clued in when neither house actually did a roll call vote on this bill. They just voice voted it, and that the administration or the lobbyists for Saudi Arabia did not go to the mat on the veto override vote. I think this was the plan from the beginning. Let the thing go through, let the hullabaloo die down, and then in the lame duck, after they're safely past the voters for the next 2 years, then they can go in and fix it. And already, according to the press reports, people in the Congress and the administration are negotiating with the Saudi lobbyists and with the Saudis to come up with a bill that will be acceptable to the Saudis, meaning those American families will not get their day in court.
Right, so who structured this then? Who planned this strategy? If this was in fact not just opposition to President Obama, if this was some strategy to be able to sneak another bill through during the lame duck session, who orchestrated this?
I think it's pretty clear that, and again, I was a little surprised that this bill went through at all, given how pervasive the Saudi influence is here, how much money the Saudis pump into Washington. As I say, I think it was the plan all along, and I think there's been a lot of communication that is now just coming to light between the administration and the Congress that this is what they always intended to do.
Right, I guess I don't understand why, though. If Saudi Arabia doesn't want this bill to pass, why would this be the plan, to have this bill pass in the form that it's in now?
Because I think there was a head of steam among the public. The American people wanted to see this accountability, and they had to find some little jujitsu to make it look like they were doing something about it, to be responding to the public clamor with an election coming up.
I gotcha.
But then to find a way to get it, to undo their own work once the election is safely over.
Right, I see what you're saying. They're basically promising the people one thing with this vote, and then as soon as the people lose interest because they think it's already been addressed, they're going to pass through what they want to pass anyway. Very interesting perspective, but let me ask you about this bill specifically. In the form that it's in right now, what exactly would it allow the families of the 9/11 victims? What would it allow them to do?
It's a fairly broad bill. What it allows is, if you're a victim of terrorism that's supported by the Saudis, that it removes what is called sovereign immunity to allow lawsuits against Saudi Arabia. And by the way, this is nothing particularly new. We have allowed such lawsuits, for example, against Iran for many years, against Cuba for many years, and possibly other countries at various times. The difference is that it's the kind of thing we do to countries we do not treat as friendly countries. In the case of Saudi Arabia, despite the fact that they've got maybe the worst human rights record outside of North Korea, that they are the biggest sponsor of terrorism in the world. You know, people keep talking about Iran. Trust me, the Iranians have nothing on the Saudis when it comes to sponsoring terrorism in places like Libya and Syria, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, you name it. And just the general Wahhabist Saudi inspiration for terrorism around the world, that they get a free pass nonetheless. You know, just as after 9/11, when they had that so-called special flight for members of the bin Laden family and the Saudi royal family to get them out of the United States right after 9/11 and not even be interviewed by the FBI. They get almost like a Clinton pass in terms of not being held accountable.
Well, that makes sense since Hillary Clinton has accepted so much money from Saudi Arabia, too. But, Jim, let me ask you, what about proof here? Of those 28 declassified pages from the 9/11 Commission report, we found out that 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi nationals. That still is not definitive proof that the Saudi government backed this monetarily, though.
No, we knew from the time of 9/11 that 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudis. What the 9/11 Commission report did, though, was establish that there were Saudi officials who were in touch with those hijackers. And all along, the government line has been, oh, well, they were not high officials. Now, how high does an official have to be in contact with these terrorists to say somebody should hold that government accountable and let's sue them and find out what their connection was to all of this? Part of the problem, of course, was with the Saudi state. It's not a normal government in the sense that what's government and what's private is clearly delineated. It's a privately owned state.
Right.
That's why it's named after the Saudi family, the Saudi Arabia. So it's the dodge, and it is a dodge, is to say, well, there was Saudi involvement, but it did not reach a certain level. Well, how do we know that?
Right, and we don't, like you said, because the business people there are tied in with the government. So even if it's a private citizen, like you said, the citizen, the private businessman, the rich private businessmen own the government there. Final question here, Jim. These serious unintended consequences that the Saudi foreign minister was talking about, obviously that's some sort of threat, but what is he talking about?
There's been talk about withdrawing treasuries. I mean, they're dumping their American treasuries that they hold, although frankly, what would they do with them that are as lucrative as what they've got? There are other things they could do about what they're going to buy weapons from other people. They'll buy them from the French or the British instead of the United States. They could threaten the things on the financial front. They could even offer themselves to lift sovereign immunity against suits against the United States government. But I don't know that many Americans that are afraid of being, I'm not afraid of being sued in Saudi courts. I really hope that despite the lame duck, Americans screech about this the way they should, contact their senators and congressmen and say this deception should not be allowed to pass.
Right, and I think that's why we're covering it now, just so the American people are aware of what's happening. And if Congress tries to slip something by during the lame duck session, that we know exactly what it is. Jim, thank you so much for coming on the show and untangling all this for us. It's great to talk to you. Our next tipping point with Niger Innes is who exactly will be voting for Donald Trump. We'll be right back for that.